What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the library. Let's jump into it. 30 years is a long time to play a console. And in those 30 years, I have played a whole lot of other consoles before it and after it. And on the 30th anniversary of the original PlayStation, I can say, without a doubt, the PlayStation 1 is the greatest system of all time. And in trying to express how that came to be, I went through a lot of internal dialogue. Like, YouTube is so full of extreme videos about how something's the greatest or the worst, but I am sincere when I say that this is the greatest console of all time, and we may never see a console this great ever again. But let's get to talking about why it is the greatest console of all time. Number one, it proved Nintendo fallible. If you weren't around for the 8 and 16-bit eras of video games, there was a common sticky point about the house that Mario built. They were kind of dicks. From forcing exclusive timed releases, limiting the number of releases a company could have in a given year, to having an iron grip on cartridge production, Nintendo's industry side activities didn't match the family-friendly face they gave the public. But they were hard to ignore. They decimated every competitor in their path. You had to play by their rules if you wanted to publish on any of their hardware. Despite ruling the 8-bit era with the original NES, trading toe-to-toe blows with the Sega Genesis a generation later, and destroying anything in the portable market with the Game Boy, there was one thing Nintendo didn't plan for: spite. We have the PlayStation brand because Sony didn't waste their efforts on the Super Nintendo CD-ROM add-on. After falling out with Nintendo, who left for Philips, a smart group of people under Sony's wing took the steps necessary to provide a next-generation console that would prove you do not need to be an industry leader to make the right call. Sure, Sony themselves thought it was going to fail and kept it under the music wing initially, but still, the power of spite. Appreciating the shockwave it sent through Nintendo's world, the most devastating was likely Squaresoft leaving Nintendo behind. With the storage capacity of the compact discs outperforming the cartridge ROMs, it was an easy jump for Square and their future releases, which would feature copious amounts of full-motion video and cinematics. The news was even more devastating to Nintendo fans who had just witnessed Final Fantasy tech demos for the then-named Ultra 64. Further down the road were more aftershocks with the PlayStation 2. Previously, Nintendo's main hardware focus was always rooted in standard upgrades, improved graphics and sound, a few extra buttons on the controller. But after having their reign damaged and companies flocking to Sony, their collective design theory got trapped on gimmicks. Were they successful gimmicks? Yeah. But they're gimmicks on outdated hardware with in-house IPs that are beginning to get really stale. I haven't been invested in a first-party Nintendo game since the Wii. Nintendo essentially removed themselves from the fight, going in their own direction, leaving Sony and Microsoft to go at each other up to the present day. There's no questioning Nintendo's successes. The question is, what happens when they run out of gimmicks? Number 2. It jumped the industry forward 5 to 10 years. Ever since the Ben Heck episode where he resurrected the original Super Nintendo CD-ROM and pointed to its specs being on par or worse than the Sega CD, it made me appreciate how much the PlayStation changed the industry. Sure, Sony's willingness to stifle most 2D sprite-based games in the early days ruffled a few feathers, mine included. But that single rule meant that the general public was about to start doing their own comparisons. With games like Battle Arena Toshinden facing Virtua Fighter, Ridge Racer lapping Daytona USA, Ace Combat dogfighting with Afterburner, Crash Bandicoot's Attitude versus Mario's Tried and True, the competition was not only fierce, but far ahead of its time. I truly believe if the Super Nintendo CD-ROM had survived, we would have been stuck with more years of just re-released kart games with only a new opening FMV and real audio tracks as the change and upgrade. Number 3. Sony's marketing made gaming truly universal. Video games have been around for well over 50 years. While it's true that even back then, a variety of folks played video games, It wasn't until the PlayStation that gaming was more than a nerdy hobby or pastime. Folks that grew up with the arcade now had hardware that could match it. Sports fans suddenly had games with constant in-game commentary, trade systems, and the chance to pit their teams against others with the memory cards. Children of any age had access to more mascots and E-rated software than even Nintendo could hope for. Thanks to their brilliant multi-territory, worldwide advertising campaign, Sony captured the hearts of everyone who ever thought about picking up a controller. Japan went after the core consumer. Europe hit up dance clubs and college towns. America went for the sports fans and arcade junkies who wanted the best-looking ports in their living room. The You Are Not Ready American marketing campaign, which taunted the diehardest of gamers with the fear of missing out, gave way to hidden messages on discs, a short-lived but sarcastic frontman, and more. By the time Christmas rolled around in 1995, there were 48 American-released PlayStation games covering almost every genre. It didn't matter what you were into, there was a game for you. Up to that point, I had never seen a console capture the heart of every person who touched it, much less welcome all of them to the fold. It's a revolution we wouldn't witness again until the Wii's successful launch with Wii Sports. The DualShock ushered in a new standard. Between the Nintendo 64's analog stick, Saturn's 3D controller attempt, and the original analog controller, how could we have ever known an industry standard was there in the making? 30 years later, the twin stick, four-shoulder button is still king and queen. Despite other features being shoehorned in or swapping stick locations, the original analog controller, the beautiful one with the larger shoulders and concave analog sticks, has redefined what we interact with and how we interact with our favorite medium. The DualShock's ascension to the throne has been a decades-long reign that may never end its inspiration towards each next successive generation. It pushed the compact disc to its limits. It's hard to believe that a compact disc was once the most futuristic household item, a simple plastic platter that used a laser beam to read data off of it. Depending on the compression, it could hold between 650 to 700 megs. With early game systems, it was merely a storage device, a way to cram in arranged music tracks and video clips previously limited by cartridge ROM chip costs. Sony saw it as a marketing platform, the stealthiest, tiniest warrior in the war for living rooms and bedrooms everywhere. That stroke of genius began with the Hear It Now, Play It Later promotional disc. For gamers who pre-ordered from the original shipment of 100,000 PlayStations, they were given a black and white sleeved PlayStation disc. When they got home, they could throw it into a music CD player and listen to several American bands under the Sony label. In between these songs were commercial messages about the system and references to the early launch titles.
Yeah, you. The person standing next to the CD player. Get your finger off of that and listen up. A new player has entered the video entertainment field, and its product's so fat, it blows away all the comp. This is the moment of truth, and now let me introduce the newest player. The name is Sony PlayStation, and the experience.
For months, this would be the only access to the system US gamers would have. Once they finally had the deck, the disc became a developer demo of various tricks and visual tricks that the PlayStation could pull off, which only increased the hype even more for what would be coming down the pike. As time went on, the discs would be used for movies, music CD bonuses, fan appreciation collections, magazines, expansion packs, and more. But one particular job assignment would rule them all. The demo discs. Checking out the newest games at a video game store is a tried and true practice. Everyone loves running up a kiosk to try something new. But what happens when something new comes to you? Strictly speaking, for the United States on this particular matter, getting the freshest content to your consumers was a somewhat slow process. Magazines were 2-month-old static information, no matter how fast it got to the newsstands. News reports were fleeting, with website visuals being limited due to bandwidth restrictions at the time. But a compact disc was cheap, easily mass-manufactured, and best of all, cheap to ship. Despite the 3DO and Saturn having a select few demo discs available at retail and packed in with the system, Sony was the first to go nuts with them. In addition to the Hear It Now demo, the PlayStation Pix Purple Edition demo that was packed inside the launch day system boxes did amazing things. It gave new owners playable levels of several games and cinematic demos for other games. This appetizer platter leads to demos being pre-order bonuses, bonus materials, and more. It was their inclusion in a specific product that Nintendo couldn't touch with the Nintendo 64. PlayStation Magazine and the PlayStation Underground. In 1997, the first US PlayStation Magazine licensed by Sony hit the newsstands, with a demo disc sealed to a paper holder buried inside. The inclusion turned the magazine into an interactive experience that allowed consumers to both read and play upcoming or existing games on the market. This simple inclusion was a huge middle finger to the long-running Nintendo Power publication. There was no way to create a disposable sample cartridge. It would be too much money for the chips and too much to cost. But Sony's deviousness didn't stop there. While the official PlayStation magazine was in front of the public's eye, people who wanted even more could subscribe to the PlayStation Underground. Where OPM was a magazine with a disc inside, the Underground was a 2-disc set with a magazine on it. Each issue came once a quarter with one disc full of demos and the other disc containing memory card saves, interviews, behind-the-scenes videos, and sometimes even an import game to try. Even better, Underground subscribers often got separate bonus demo discs regularly shipped to them focusing on a single game. To understand just how big of an impact samplers had on the general public, look at my website stats. The demo disc master page is consistently the most viewed and used page on the site, often 2-to-1 against the next most viewed page. Between the nostalgia and the memories of hype, Sony's simple but addictive use of the demo disc captured the hearts of an entire generation of gamers that we may never see again. It finally gave Japanese anime a proper home. Japanese animation is still one of the most dynamic art forms in the world. It's a cultural phenomenon that transcends the very nature of the medium with a variety of content, animation art styles, and more. Anime and manga aren't new to the gaming scene. It's been with us forever. But before the PlayStation, seeing the original Japanese art was a rarity. Working Designs tried valiantly with their Sega CD releases, and several cart-based games snuck it onto store shelves. Usually, though, they were bastardized. Sony's little gray box, supported by the juggernaut that was Final Fantasy VII, finally gave publishers enough wiggle room to let the original artwork shine brightly. Ghost in the Shell, Dragon Ball, and the Vampire Hunter D games became harbingers to the flood of anime games we now see in the modern era, especially including the original artwork. It sank their other competitor with just 4 syllables. Imagine you're the newest kid on the block, about to face a press corps of gaming journalists, industry professionals, and your soon-to-be peers. The main rival to your machine, yours, the Sega Saturn, has just had its price point announced at $399, which in 1995 would be the equivalent of just over $800 in modern freedom bucks adjusted for inflation. When Sony finally answered the question on everyone's mind, the now legendary press conference with the price heard round the world, the presenter called up then president of Sony Steve Race for a brief presentation. Upon reaching the podium, Steve Race paused, leaned into the microphone, and just said, $299, and walked back to his seat. In a single, brilliant, and honestly funny moment, Sony erased Sega's entire announcement from the face of the earth with just 4 syllables. There's never been a more jaw-dropping, press-stopping moment than that. With 2 decades of E3, nothing has ever even come close to it. It catapulted the PlayStation into the forefront of the public eye. It was that tongue-in-cheek humor that powered the system's early years of existence, and it was perfect, just like the smile on the presenter. It had its own library. Move forward. Backwards compatibility wasn't exactly new to the industry, seeing at least the 7800 already had that covered. But when it came time for the PlayStation brand to evolve in 2000, Sony's PlayStation 2's backward compatibility feature ushered in an entirely new vibe to the marketplace. Old games were no longer outdated, they were still in rotation. Second, since the PlayStation 2 offered simple options for improving the load times and possibly making the graphics look a little smoother, it gave fans a reason to dust off their old library to see what worked where. Between the PlayStation 2 and folks handing down their PlayStation 1s to siblings, the PlayStation library was still circulating in 2 generations of gamers. With the rise of dedicated video game stores, the reselling and trading of software helped generate a whole new ecosystem for used games and accessories. With backward compatibility continuing onto the PlayStation 3, it helped keep the original game prices down in the secondary market. It was hard to have nostalgia and demand longing for games when you could still play them at any given time, 30 years running. The Game Shark. When I was a kid, the Game Genie changed my life. I had so much fun messing with codes in various games that it added hours of playtime to every card I owned. When the Game Shark Pro came out for the PlayStation, my world was rocked for a second time. Finally being able to beat tough games, hacking my own codes, and building my custom built-in list of cheats was so relaxing and cool. It also didn't hurt that some of the knockoffs allowed the use of import games on unmodded systems. The Game Shark was so monumental to my PlayStation life that I eventually found my way to working for Interact Accessories in Maryland. It allowed me the chance to work on the industry side of things for 2 years, all while still playing the PlayStation games I knew and loved and interacting with a fan base on a countrywide scale. I still get hellos from staff and old forum members, but even better, I'm still actively using the Game Shark, both in normal usage and for helping with Project Up One. That accessory eventually faded away due to system updates being able to disable it, but it will always have a permanent part in my PlayStation setup. The Dex Drive. To be clear, both Game Shark and the Dex Drive were available for the Nintendo 64, but with PlayStation games having the various exchanges and save data secrets across so many more games, it was only right to add it to the list. The Dex Drive was a device that plugged into your PC and allowed you to copy memory card save data, as well as code files for the Game Shark Pro, to and from the computer. If you just happened to be on the internet at the time, it also meant you could trade these with other players, and in some cases, directly from certain publishers. The sky was the limit. Unlockable characters, fan-made team rosters, every level unlocked in your favorite game, and more was available. Interact's Little Box That Could created its own subculture of collecting across multiple avenues, but we'll get to that a little later. It was the golden era of role-playing games. If you followed Game-Rave TV for a long time, you know that one of the hills I will forever die on is that the original PlayStation was the golden era of role-playing games. It just could not be beaten when it came to quantity and quality across a variety of choices. The Final Fantasy series, Persona, Alundra, Rhapsody, and Legend of Dragoon, among a crowd of other great titles, provided gamers with thousands of hours of great content, gameplay, and storytelling. Even tactical RPGs reigned supreme with Final Fantasy Tactics, Vandal Hearts, with smaller releases like Eternal Eyes acting as support roles. When the PlayStation 2 came along, it enjoyed quite an elaborate amount of role-playing games as well. For me, though, too many of them felt half-baked, too similar to each other, or wandered too far from the earlier game's successes. Final Fantasy X. It welcomed homebrew developers. Video game hobbyists who wanted to dip their toes into the game-making pool were usually limited to just tinkering on their computer, making PC programs. Sony decided to make their own pool with the NetEurose program, figuratively of course. A special black PlayStation console with a unique serial cable connection and access card came bundled with software and books to let anyone try their hand at making simple, but not quite retail, PlayStation games. The setup wasn't a one-off either. You had to literally sign up for the program and sign forms to have access to a members-only website where other Yarose owners could trade tricks and help quality test each other's work. Membership was so strict that when I finally found myself my own bundle, the former owner filled out all of my information on the membership form. That's how legit it was. The kit did come with one drawback, so as not to give professional developers a cheaper means than the proper dev kits. The Yarose was limited in several libraries in how you were able to test and execute code. If nothing else, it helped developers get creative in their code work, like a training ground on their way to possibly doing the real thing. If you're looking for a simpler way to try your skills in programming, in the US you can check out Fighter Maker and RPG Maker, which all you need is a memory card, the game, and a lot of patience. It was one of the earliest toys to life examples. If you've been loving life with Amiibo, Skylanders, and LEGO Dimensions, then you'll appreciate the Japanese exclusive Zixeed. 30 years ago, Bandai did the unthinkable and combined a robotic fighting game with real-world models you built from scratch. Each of the 4 mech units had 4 main pieces that could be swapped with each other, allowing for a level of real-world customization not seen with a game before. Sadly, the robots require a special controller adapter to be used, as the game hangs at the disconnected P-screen if all 8 pieces aren't in play. It's one of the few games to not be properly emulated due to this accessory limitation. After all this time, I finally broke down and snagged myself a set, which I am hoping to do great things with in the next year or two. 20-year-old Jason is screaming with glee right now. Disc swapping games. One of the most unique gaming experiences to come out of the PlayStation era were the disc swapping games. I don't mean moving from a next disc a la D or Final Fantasy VII, I mean using other discs with the original game. In the States, Monster Rancher was the king of the castle, where players could literally swap in any compact disc, regardless of it being music, PlayStation, another system's CDs, and generate content from them in Monster Rancher 1, 2, and Card Battle. In the first 2 titles, this meant creating monsters. In the digital card battle, it meant creating unique cards. To make things even more interesting, in Card Battle, the game stored the disc's serial ID so you couldn't reuse it to regenerate rare cards, thus turning your entire existing physical library into a collectible card game storefront from day one. For those with access to play imports, Japan and Europe got VibRibbon, where music tracks created the stage hurdles you had to correctly button press past. There's also internal section, which generates enemy patterns and backgrounds in a Tempest-like environment. This one has evolved into games using MP3 files or a password entry to generate content nowadays, but it just pales to the old days of frantically hunting down every compact disc in the house. It gave birth to the greatest creative renaissance in console gaming history. Let me start this section by saying Squaresoft made baseball and fighting games. That's how insane it was for the late 90s. There were no limits and all guardrails were off. Companies had found a sweet spot for development cost versus game manufacturing and combined that with the PlayStation's ginormous user base. Development houses were willing to try anything and everything, especially since most games only needed a small or moderate development team. So much of the PlayStation's lifecycle was introducing players to concepts they've never seen before. The flat 2D world of Parappa the Rapper, the walking-talking puzzle adventure of Mr. Domino, the hilariously not dodgeball action in Poi Poi, and more. Behind the scenes, Lightspan and Sony were creating educational programs around the console. Homework literally involved taking a PlayStation home to play the game and answer questions from the worksheets. But America really couldn't hold a torch to the Japanese library's contributions. So much so that they get their own entries. Japan's musical revolution. The Western world really didn't see its musical era until the PlayStation 2, when Activision lovingly took inspiration from Konami's Guitar Hero Freak series for their Guitar Hero reveal. Konami and other publishers were already years ahead of them on the PlayStation 1, and they weren't just limited to guitars either. Alongside the Guitar Freaks were Beatmania, their amazing DJ rhythm game. If those weren't up to snuff, dance pads could be abused to no end with Dance Dance Revolution. There were also games based around tambourine usage, and I mean an actual plastic tambourine, being the conductor of an orchestra, and hell, you could even pretend to strum a guitar with the pick controller from Aerosmith Quest for Fame. Button mashers could also lose their mind with the pop music games and controller. Returning to a previous entry, companies took advantage of the disc swapping abilities with append discs, one of the greatest Japanese play on words I have ever witnessed. The append disc, aka appendix, were separate disc releases with all new songs to play through. Players would load up the original game and then swap in the append disc so it could use the original's assets as needed. It was one of the earliest forms of downloadable content in the PlayStation suite of machines. The difference being, if the store closed down, you still had your purchases. Japan's diverse world of not games. Hear me out. What if your game system could do everything for you, essentially be a mini Google to answer all your questions and needs before the internet had truly taken off? Japan's publishers and developers provided users with a bountiful amount of software that didn't limit itself to the standard video game mold. Take the Practical series nestled inside the Simple 1500 set. With Volume 8, Stock Investment, players could be taught how the stock market worked. In Volume 1, Transfer Information 2000, it was an interactive map of all the trains and stations in Japan at the time. It gamified figuring out how to make the shortest trip between a starting point and destination. There's also Volume 9, Aromatherapy, where the game disc acts as a consultant. You answer questions and the game provides the best scents for you to use to help cure whatever ails you. I'm not even kidding. Another series of note is Horse Racing's First Law. It is, practically, an interactive history of Japanese horse races, jockeys, and steeds. Users can assign any racer to a variety of real-world parks and have them race against each other. It was essentially a simulator for both gambling angles and reliving historical events. Anything was possible on the PlayStation. Survival horror. Thanks to Capcom, it pushed survival horror into the global limelight. Horror games aren't anything new to video games. Look at legendary titles like Splatterhouse, the original Super Famicom Clock Tower, hell, Haunted House on the 2600, etc. However, intentionally crippling the player's movements while sending a horde of zombies after them in tight spaces throws all of that out the window. So came the day when Resident Evil showed up. Capcom's bold new IP introduced the world to the Umbrella Corporation and the STARS team. Trapped within the walls of a creepy mansion with what would be lovingly referred to as tank controls, tied a criminally small inventory capacity, Resident Evil set the sales charts ablaze. Combined with the various puzzle solving, key hunting, ink ribbon rationing, and let's be honest, amazing jump scares, Capcom kicked open the floodgates to a now beloved decades-long series and new subgenre. Speaking of Resident Evil, so many incredible franchises started here. I'll let this one speak for itself. Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, Ace Combat, Armored Core, Final Fantasy VII, the game, not the series, Gran Turismo, Sony's MLB, now the show, Klonoa, Legacy of Kain and Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver, Suikoden, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. All of those titles I just mentioned are just the franchises who have sequels, remasters, and/or re-releases through the current modern era. If we cut this off at the PlayStation 3, we'd be here for another 20 minutes of franchises that started on the PlayStation. Memory cards. My God, the memory cards. The PlayStation wasn't the first system to have a memory card, as the Neo Geo had one. With that, players could use it to load up their saves from the home versions to the arcade versions and vice versa. With the PlayStation, though, a memory card's role was expanded upon and then doubled down on in ways that are still being talked about in present day. First and foremost is simply saving data. Breaking this feature away from the console's onboard battery meant that there was no need to ever risk losing your save data to a sibling or friend ever again. Each person had their own save source. Saves could be traded back and forth between folks. In the early days before the dex drive, people would physically mail each other their spare memory cards to exchange their favorite files, like a global library system. The save data themselves took on their own personalities. Simple 3-frame animations let you easily see what was stored with easy-to-read information at the bottom of the screen. Depending on the game, these icons even changed based on what had been experienced in the game. Hell, even using different save slots could produce up to 15 different icons. Or more. I'm looking at you, Origins. For me, the truly magical part was the cross-compatibility. The always referenced Metal Gear Solid trick with Psycho Mantis, knowing which other Konami games you had played, is there and forever. But being able to take your rookie college football star in NCAA football and then getting him into that same year's Madden draft was cool as well. Arc the Lad allowed you to upgrade your save to the next sequel, providing unlockable goodies, and even Karsha allowed you to trade items with a fellow player. If you still have your memory card and are looking for ways to preserve the data, you have 4 ways to do it, from the ultra nerdy to the ultra easy. The nerdiest is to still have a Windows 95 or 98 machine with the Dex drive. The saner way would be to use the PlayStation 3's memory card reader with OrionSoft's amazing Homebrew software, with the link in the description. If you have a PlayStation 2, you can transfer saves to the PS2 memory card. You'll need to transfer it back if you want to use it though, but it turns the PS2 memory card into a teeny tiny little archive drive. Lastly, if you have a PlayStation 3, you can use the same reader and transfer everything to virtual memory cards on the PS3, which is required anyway if you want to save when playing the system. Finally, if you would love to research or just look fondly back on your old saves, you can check out Shawn's incredible site at memcard.art. It is slowly but surely crawling through the entire gallery of save icons to be had across various regions. It's a hell of a gallery to flip through, and his presentation is kind of making me jealous. No lie. I'll have a link below. It also reintroduced collector's editions to the United States, and then all hell broke loose. With the US, at least from a console perspective, limited edition releases were really few and far between. You had both Zelda Gold cartridges, the t-shirt with Illusion of Gaia, Earthbound's guidebook bundle, and so on. But it was working designs with their gorgeous renditions of Lunar the Silver Star Story and Lunar Eternal Blue that truly took our breaths away. Maybe it was a stab at Sega, maybe it was a way to pay tribute to the core consumer, but that hardcover manual and map were so nice to get in that big box. As time went on and they continued the trend with Ark the Lad, Sony would take note and begin their own line of collector's editions, but in a much simpler format, creating some of the best 3-game bundles a game hunter could collect. This trend would finally take hold on the PlayStation 2 and original Xbox, where all bets were off. Limited editions suddenly had their own variants, and their own crazy prices, and their own crazy inclusions. We won't even speak about the chaos going on in the modern day. And lastly, the PlayStation console is the greatest console of all time because it changed my life. As I mentioned in the previous video, without this system, I'm no longer in the video game hobby, nor the fanzine world, or have my job at GameShark thanks to the fanzine. I don't make friends with Steve, who got me into variant hunting, or met a world's worth of amazing other collectors and friends who have been both my rocks and my scouts for over 20 years. I literally would not be here talking to you right now. After 30 years and a million miles, the PlayStation 1 will always be there with me, no matter what. There is still so much to explore, and I hope you'll continue the journey with me. I appreciate your support for the channel and site all these years. It's been incredibly amazing. With all that said, for now, and the rest of time, the PlayStation will always be the greatest console system ever released. And there you have it, guys. Discuss below. I'll see you next episode. Take care.